Hello, and welcome to Movers, Shakers, Designers, Makers. I'm Steve Carpenter, Dean of the College of Arts and Architecture at Penn State, and today I'm talking with Jeremy Dennis, who earned a Master of Fine Arts degree at Penn State in 2016. Jeremy is a fine art photographer and a member of the Shinnecock Indian Nation. He serves as the leader of Ma's House, a communal art space located on the Shinnecock Indian Reservation in Southampton, New York. The house includes a residency program for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and an art studio and library, along with an array of art and history-based programs for tribe members and the broader local community. Jeremy, I've been looking forward to having this conversation with you for a while now, and mostly want to focus on and talk about the important work that you're doing and share it with our viewers. So welcome, and thank you for being my guest today.
Well, thanks for inviting, and I've been keeping up with you and people from Penn State, mostly on social media, and it's been so wonderful to just make sure everyone's okay and keep up with all the projects and updates. So thanks for inviting me today.
You're welcome. Thanks for keeping up with us. Really, really appreciate it. So before we get to the work that you're doing now, I want to go back a few years to when you came to Penn State to pursue your graduate degree in the School of Visual Arts, and specifically focusing on your MFA. I remember when you were a student here in the college and in SOVA. So what was your path to Penn State, Jeremy? In other words, why did you choose Penn State and why did you decide to come to Penn State?
Well, I would say in my entire academic progress or path and career, I was really surprised at every step of just getting or achieving higher education. So in my family, both of my parents were at least in undergraduate educated. So they both went to college, and here at the Shinnecock Reservation, oftentimes that can be rare for families to both have that opportunity. And so for me, growing up in that environment, I just thought like maybe high school will be enough for me, and then I'll just go pursue something else, or college would be enough for me, and then I'd have to figure out something. And then when I interviewed at Penn State, the first person I really met or engaged with was Lonnie Graham, and he was just such a awesome person to initiate this connection with. We sat down in his office and we spoke for a pretty long time. And when I think back to my portfolio back then, I would even criticize myself and say it wasn't that impressive, but I think that he was really inspiring, and he saw the potential in it. And ever since we met, I think we've always stayed in touch, and having him as a mentor and eventually my committee chair really helped shape who I am today. And we even have a project that's ongoing together. And so I think it was just the mentorship and that first initiation that really made my impression for Penn State.
That's great. Great to hear. It's always nice to learn how people find their way to Penn State, but also to get a sense of maybe what was the key point or key moment that said, you know, this is really the place that makes sense for me. So thank goodness that you and Lonnie were able to have that conversation. So let's look a little more deeply at your MFA experience, Jeremy. I'm curious about that experience in our program in the School of Visual Arts, in the sense of, was it what you expected when you started? Certainly your conversation with Lonnie Graham was early on in that process. So I'm wondering about, was it what you expected it to be? How, in what ways did you grow as an artist over the time that you were engaged in your studies? Some general reflections on your experience in the program. In other words, can we dig a little bit deeper into that experience?
Oh, sure. I think during my 2-year program at Penn State for my MFA, I really benefited a lot from the art criticism classes with John, Simone, and a couple of other teachers that I sat in on. Like I was just here and there in different art history and art criticism courses. And I would say the work that represents my portfolio today was really shaped in those 2 years, because I would consider myself maybe like imitating other artists in college before that time, just trying to get the basics of my medium a little bit more understood or mastered. but it was really during that 2-year period that I just attending those classes and sitting in and writing and writing about my own art and writing criticism about other artists, was I able to actually narrow down like what resonated with me, what artists and concepts that I really wanted to engage with. And I thought that was the most valuable part of it. I also have never visited a campus that was so impressive. I think Penn State is what you think of when you think of college. Even though I went to Stony Brook, it was a little bit of a remote experience. It was a lot of commuting back and forth at times. And so living in State College and going to Penn State, it really felt like something important was happening in my life. And so I think all of this culminated to really allowing me to focus. And I think the 2-year period also was something that I really needed to like pack everything in, make sure I engaged with all the different departments and try to make as many connections and I guess fuel my curiosity and what is possible. I think I did a little bit of CNC kind of sculpture in the architecture department. I took a little bit of sculpture classes at the visual art department as well. And I thought that that really helped out because just moving away from your primary medium, mine being digital photography, really helps give you a sense of like, maybe I can borrow from that and incorporate it in mine, or maybe it could change up the traditional way that photography is usually presented. And so I think that that was really great. And then just having fellow classmates in all different mediums, being able to sit in their critiques and hear their feedback as well. I didn't think that it was just feedback for their work. I thought it was fully fully engaging for all of us listening.
That's really, I want to ask you about that, two parts of what you just mentioned, Jeremy. The first being, you said, venturing beyond your specific discipline of digital photography and taking these other courses, sculpture, CNC, routing, and these others. Was that something you came in to the program with, this curiosity of exploring other areas, or was it once you were in the digital photography space, you started to think about these other media and how they might help you expand your practice?
I think it was because of the student body and the faculty body that like everyone had such a wonderful and productive, I guess, portfolio and everyday life as an artist. And so there were so many different ways where, like, if you just wanted to make new friends in the ceramics area, you could go down there and hang out and they'd set you up on the wheel, or you could go down to Bonnie's classroom or the shop and just hang out with the sculpture students and check out their work in progress pieces. And so I think that just that openness alone was really inviting, and eventually it kind of convinced me to take their classes and just sometimes in some cases take multiple classes in those fields, just because it was so transformative. And I felt like just doing photography or just taking photography classes, that might have been too much of that common undergraduate experience where you're just like, all right, I think I know photography by now and it's time to change it up. And so I think that really helped out personally.
It's good to hear. And actually your response sort of overlapped into a space of my the other question I had, which was those other experiences, they were courses perhaps, but it seemed like something in what you mentioned suggested you may have just wandered into spaces as well. So in what I'm hearing is informal and in informal ways, you were able to navigate between and into other parts of the school and even other parts of the college. Is that fair?
Oh, absolutely. I loved going to the Palmer Museum and the lecture hall nearby. And there were always, in warmer weather at least, a lot of outdoor performance and installations and pop-up initiatives. And so I would try to go to as many of those as possible. Of course, you could just leave if it's not really related to your work, but I think it's so beneficial to just learn, become more worldly, incorporate different aspects into your own work. and make new connections between either photography or in my work and subject matter, indigenous culture and heritage. And I think from grad school, I really wanted to um, in, just create more bridges between like what we think of as either popular storytelling or popular culture or art history that's a little bit more well known with some of the facets that I thought that I thought were missing. And so I would just sit in on other classes trying to say like, oh, that resonates with me, but there's no indigenous version of that. So I'd love to write about that or read about that or create art about that.
Mhm. Well, that gives me a really nice platform to move on to a new question. That is, the place that you've just described in graduate school, that sounds like a pretty interesting and invigorating place to study. And so you're here for 2 years and then you graduate and you move on. I'm curious to learn about what your path has been post Penn State, the work that you've been up to, the projects you've been engaged in. Can you tell us a bit about your path post Penn State?
Oh, absolutely. Well, right at the end of it was about May 2016. Lonnie and Graham Sullivan, we all worked together to submit this application at the very last deadline date, pretty much. And it was for a project I wanted to start called On This Site, Indigenous Long Island, which I'm still working on today. And so that application went out. We luckily got accepted, and we had Penn State as the fiscal sponsor. And so I think it was such a beautiful opportunity that at the end of this 2-year program, I got to kind of continue the conversations, connect the connections. And even though I began in 2016, it's a project that they funded me for twice. And so I think the saddest thing is that Lonnie's still in Pennsylvania and everyone's still really far away, but we still keep in touch on social media and the project still exists online. And since then, I've just been focusing on that website and going out as a photographer. The project entails using my skills as a landscape photographer to document sacred sites throughout my surrounding community of Long Island, New York. From Brooklyn all the way out to Montauk Point, and it encapsulates sacred sites, burial sites, historic sites, everything site specifically. And I did that kind of based on a lot of the art history classes I was taking at Penn State, looking at old Civil War photos, just trying to imagine those places today and how sometimes when it rains or gets foggy, it looks exactly like those photos from the 19th century. And so that really sparked something within me, thinking about the past and present and landscape photography. And so I worked with Lonnie after I graduated, and that's been a project that I think that you need multiple lifetimes to even complete or get halfway through. It's just so much history, so much landscape, and more.
So that project was post Penn State. It certainly had a starting point with Penn State and a connection to Penn State. And that project. So I'm trying to remember. You were featured in a Big Ten video, a promotional video that the Big Ten Athletic and Academic Conference put out. Can you tell us a little bit about that Big Ten video? And was that part of this project, or they were featuring parts of this project, if I'm not mistaken?
Oh yeah, they did a profile on me a couple of months after we received that grant, and they actually came all the way out to New York with a film crew, and they edited it and premiered it a few weeks or months later. And it was so wonderful that old roommates or old classmates or old people that I met in Pennsylvania were messaging me on social media saying that they saw the ad on like between football games or on local TV stations. And I think they still play it even today, like not as frequently, but it's just one of their archived videos that you could probably even see on YouTube as well. But that really covered the On the Site project that I was working on, some of my past work, it even included my cousin Shane, who's also an artist here at Shinnecock, and my grandmother Dorothy Dennis, who's being photographed by me in the video. And so it was such a beautiful documentation of that time, and I still have it on my YouTube channel. So I really love what they did.
I do too. It's such a wonderful. If I'm not mistaken, it's only like 1 minute long, so it's not long, but there's so much packed into it. And I know most of the power of that short video is because of the richness of the work that you do and that was featured there. So as we're talking about post Penn State and projects you've been working on, you're working on Ma's House. Can you say a bit about what that project is? And you mentioned earlier you've been following and keeping up with the college and the School of Visual Arts through social media. I've been keeping up with you through social media as well, and have just been simply impressed with the way that you have built Ma's House, not necessarily the physical structure, but the conceptual work that is Ma's House. So would you tell us a bit about Ma's House?
Oh yeah, I'd be happy to. It was a project that started around June 2020, and just before the peak of COVID, when it started to spread in sort of spring 2020, I was actually at an artist residency, the Santa Fe Art Institute. And so I rushed back home. I pretty much got all messed up and social distanced and canceled all my plans. Some of them were involuntary cancellations, like galleries I was going to work with closed permanently, shows I was going to be featured in were indefinitely canceled. But I was really talking with my family. My parents grew up in this house, and my older sister Kelly, who's now a Shinnecock trustee, at the time she was working at a local residency called the Watermill Center. And so we really came up with this idea that, like, we can't go anywhere, we can't really do anything, we have all this free time. And I was really on that path of going to residency because for me, I probably get 90% of my portfolio work done at these residency experiences. And so we had this old family home that was built in the 1960s just down the road. It's the home that my mom grew up in with her 5 siblings. My grandparents built the house, and then eventually my older sister and I grew up in the house as well. And for the past 4 years, it's unfortunately been vacant due to all the utilities being shot, all the water damage. There was actually a family of raccoons living inside the empty parts of the house. And at one point, when we opened up the walls, there was just like a pretty clear hole from the outside to inside on the most vulnerable side. So over the past year, my father and I have really been the ones redoing the whole inside and outside, from drywall, floors, ceilings, painting, anything you can think of. We had to hire out for redoing the plumbing and heating. And so in June 2020, we started a GoFundMe, and we thought we would get like $4,000, we'd get $5,000, but eventually it was over 50,000. And so with that huge generosity, I wanted to just dedicate half the house, the old living room, to more public space, informal gallery, workshop space. And it's been used for all that since we really opened up in August this past year. And I think it really, I think that we have a focus on artists of color. Shinnecock itself is really mixed race, from people who are white passing to Black passing. And I think that with COVID, we've seen an overlap with the Black Lives Matter movement kind of happening at the same time, along with just COVID itself. Like, frontline workers are usually people of color who can't just take a break from work and live off savings. They've also been unable to get help if they do contract the virus. And for me, a lot of my work is about social justice, looking at history of colonization. And so we really want to just dedicate this space to help artists of color through the residency that we have at the house, along with showing art and making it mutually beneficial for people to come through and benefit, and have cross kind of pollination through cultural exchange, just learning about one another. If you've never been to the Hamptons, as it's most popularly known, it's one of the most segregated places in the country. And so there are issues of just xenophobia, just being afraid of other people. That's on both sides of the reservation border. And so I'm just a big believer that coming together heals that divide. Creating art and talking about that art is also a way of healing. And so I was at the same time really naive early on in the pandemic. I thought like, all right, we're just going to spend 15 days inside. We're not going to engage with each other and it'll just all pass. But we are where we are today. So we're still on that cusp of like having Zoom events, having socially distanced outdoor events, and just being wary of everyone's safety. But we do have a huge and ambitious dream for the project. And just this past October, we finally got our IRS approval as a 501c3. And so we're hoping that that'll sustain the project in the future.
That's fantastic, Jeremy. When I was setting up the question, I said not necessarily building Ma's house physically, but conceptually. But there was some physical construction to Ma's house, as you've mentioned. It's just an amazing example to me of having an idea, a concept, and then working toward that concept to realize it. So how do artists? Is there an application process for artists to be awarded a residency at Ma's house? How does that work?
Oh yeah, I think the program benefits a lot from me being an artist to help shape that experience, but there's no fee to apply, there's no fee to stay. Unfortunately, you just have to pay to travel to this area of the country, but it's up and call, it's a residency that's available year round. Since August 2021, we've had monthly residents. And so our most recent one is Jacob Reyes. He's from Orlando, Florida. And so we've had 5 artists come through so far. Each of them have had some sort of public engagement, and all of it being socially distanced and safe, and having everyone being vaccinated. But I have to send the visual art department at Penn State a flyer so that people apply after grad school or undergrad and take part in the program in some way.
Absolutely. Please send that along. We'd be happy to share it broadly with the students and alumni. So, Jeremy, it's interesting to me that we're having this conversation in the first week of December 2021. Last week was a week in which many Americans celebrate a time to historically to get together for over a meal and have family in a celebration of thanks. But that practice is built on history and I would say underappreciated, undervalued, and maybe curiously told history from a majority perspective. And so I'm curious about a couple of things. One, your take on just what the end of November means at this moment in history in North America. But also, you mentioned the pandemic, and so we have the pandemic. We have more attention to global warming. We have economic crisis. We have a range of concerns, social and political concerns at this moment that have been with us for a while, but over the past couple of years of COVID have really come to a different level of visibility. So I'm curious to know your take on this literal moment in time that we are in, end of November, beginning of December, but then two, this broader sense of the social, cultural, and political moment, either generally or even particularly through your lens as an Indigenous artist and a person who advocates for social action and social justice.
Oh, sure. It's definitely been a troubling time. And for us at Shinnecock, I would say one of the biggest economic things that have struck our community is the annual powwow has been canceled for 2 years in a row. And I would say on average, most indigenous communities would say that 30% of their community are people who identify as artists, crafts people, some sort of makers who benefit from powwows and sell enough art or craft to sustain themselves and their family for the whole year. And so for us, we've not had those ticket sales, we've not had those booth sales for the past 2 years. And so luckily, because we live in a pretty affluent area of the country, we've been able to have some financial donations and supply donations for families in need. But I think that's just something that just due to the pandemic alone really, I would say, just made things like 10 times worse than they already were economically. But on the plus side, for our economic development, my cousin Tila Troge recently developed the Shinnecock monuments, which if you've driven on the local highways, they're either famous or infamous for their presence. It's kind of like driving through those Jurassic Park gates.
Right.
But for us, it's so awesome because they're like these 3-story tall monuments with a Shinnecock seal at the top on the north and south side of Sunrise Highway with these, it's pretty much a slideshow of different ads in the middle, but it is really monumental, and it is really surprising for most people who haven't seen them before because they think there's no indigenous people left in New York State or on the East End. And so this is pretty much a pretty blatant reminder that we're still here. In fact, the highway does go straight through our land, and that's the reason why we were able to build those structures. And so I thought that I thought it was just a whole humorous situation between permission and not having permission to do it. I think Shinnecock leadership is still in some sort of litigation and owes a lot of fees for legal representation over the monument since May 2019. And so it's just all these like really secretive but also complicated things that are causing financial drain for our community that are really hard to explain and aren't similar to really many other situations. And so with Moss House alone, for example, we had this dream project of turning it into an art space, but because of being on a reservation, you can't get a mortgage or loan to build. And the basic reason for that is that if you're not on a reservation and you take out a loan and you can't pay it back, usually the bank can just take the house back or take some sort of asset. But for reservations, they can't really do that. There's no way for that exchange to actually happen. And so we're just outright not even given any loans for construction or residential dreams. So for us, we just had to have the money outright. So that's both for construction and also for utilities. I remember going to get our plumbing redone, and most people, if they're not from the reservation, you could do monthly plans, you could do like half and half deposit, but we had to pay it outright because they just don't trust that we'll pay it in full if they do the work. And so there's this, I would call it discrimination because it is just like racially one group that can't get access to assistance and other groups that can. But I would say, yeah, it's really difficult for a lot of families besides Ma's house to actually build. For me and my family, we had 3 generations growing up in the same house, and that's really common because of that fact.
And so that just the example you gave about about a mortgage, not being able to take out a mortgage or having to pay in full for certain things, upgrades, or even just basic necessities for a house. That's not new. That's longstanding. That's a longstanding practice, and so that I'm sure is news to many people watching. And so the way in which that set of policies, let me put it that way, has shaped not only your experience growing up and living on the reservation, but also the ways it shapes those of other members of the community, is constantly around you and constantly informs the work that you do, whether it is as an artist or as a teacher or as a leader in some other form. I'm not sure if you'd like to add to that, but I'm just thinking that this is just an ongoing cultural space. This is an ongoing mode of existence. Are you seeing any? I guess where I'm going with that is, Jeremy, do you see any ways that things might change, might move in a different direction? That's where I'm headed with that.
Oh, sure. I was just going to add to that section about like not being able to get a loan. One thing that compounds on top of that is when we have non-Shinnecock people visit the reservation, we're often stereotyped as being poor. Like, why don't you fix up your house? Why are you being lazy and not putting in any work? But for so many, it's just an impossible hurdle just to even begin or save up that much money while also taking care of themselves and their family. And so it's a social issue. It's just a basic needs issue of having shelter all at the same time.
Yeah, so that's structural, is what you're talking about, right? It's a structural discrimination, or a structural racism, or structural structural context that the complexities there. I'm stumbling here because I mean the issue in the matter is so complex that I want to make sure that we bring attention to it.
Oh yeah, I was gonna try to answer the rest of your
Please
question about like the brighter future.
Yes, please.
People often ask, like, when is our casino going to get built? I I think at this point I just give joke answers because there's just so much that goes into that, so many problems that can go wrong. But the Shinnecock Monument is one form of our economic development. We just get pretty much passive revenue from maintaining those, and people rent it out to share their business. We're also working on a gas station along that same strip of highway. So that'll be a much needed resource. Hopefully it'll be a little bit cheaper than other gas stations, being tax-free potentially. We're also working on a restaurant and hotel on what we call Westwoods in Hampton Bays along that same property as well. That'll be something that people really desire, just having local food, indigenous food, supporting a marginalized community. We do have a lobster factory, but pretty much all the businesses along the main strip that connects to the outside world are privately owned by individual families or individuals themselves. So it doesn't really trickle back into the community that much. Besides that, I keep trying to tell people to come out to our powwow on Labor Day weekend, because that's just a huge income for Shinnecock, because sometimes 12,000 people come out for that 4-day stretch. Usually through ticket sales, we can pay for people's salaries, fill in potholes, just keep the tribal government running as well. And individual families usually rent a booth for pretty inexpensive fees. They usually get their money back and more selling what they have to sell. And my family usually has some sort of presence in that same way.
Got it. So there's some optimism there, and I'm encouraged by those different examples that are in process. So one of the things, Jeremy, that I like to ask my guests at this point is to, which essentially builds upon your last response, but what are you optimistic about? Not just necessarily generally and in terms of community, but developments in your own work. What excites you? What are you optimistic about?
Well, it's kind of a bittersweet thing, because I'm starting more and more to get exposed to more opportunities. I think with the Black Lives Matter movement, as I said before, that has really opened people's eyes to the ways that some people get offered things and get paid for their work and are shown and celebrated as artists and as individuals. And so I think that for Indigenous people, we're able to now be seen in museums, be included in commercial and museum art spaces. And I've even been invited to curate for different opportunities. And it's really been a mixed bag, because most institutions don't have a history with I would say that it's such a nuanced subject of having an Indigenous curator, because we have different expectations of us right from the get-go. Like, you can invite us to curate for an art show, but um, I think that people already know what they want you to do, so you don't really have that much say. And I think that's true just being a visual artist as well. When curators reach out to you, or a gallerist reaches out to you, they want you to really cater to their patronage, or keep creating work that's really stereotypical, or really reductive of who you are and your culture. And so I think it's, yeah, an interesting mixed bag of like getting these new opportunities. That's really hopeful, but I think the people with those motives maybe are keeping something secret, or like, why are they including you all of a sudden? Are they really coming from a good place? And has the education been done for them to even work alongside with Indigenous people to do it appropriately and respectfully, and not just like, well, we have a huge roster of non-native people in our museum, why don't we just quickly get one and then never talk to this person again?
Yeah.
So that's, yeah.
Yeah, like ticking off a box or something. You know, your answer made me think of two things very specifically. One is that maybe three. One is it makes sense for you to be a curator or to move into that curatorial space, not completely and leave the rest of your work behind, because I think it's all part of a larger project. But I could really see you as a curator taking curatorial agency to tell stories, to move certain histories and stories and perspectives to a different audience. The second thing I was thinking is essentially you're talking about this superficiality, or the expectations that are premeditated by people who might reach out for an Indigenous curator. And the challenge that you must have to push back against that, because maybe you don't get another chance to curate, but at the same time, this is my chance. I'm not going to give in and be a superficial stereotype of what others might project on me. The third thing takes me back to Penn State, where when you were a student in your MFA thesis exhibition. Many of the works, I remember Zoller Gallery and your works in there. You walk in and you see these silhouettes, or these profiles with collages from visual culture and popular culture, and then you go around the back, and they're just props. There's nothing to the back of them, and if I'm not mistaken, there were these little figurines pictured in positioned in different places. Which to me, there's some connection here about the superficiality, and this is what people expect us to look like and to do and to perform. But in reality, that's just a prop. There are deeper histories that are missing, and the substance is absent. I don't know. There's something in what you mentioned that you took me back to some earlier work the work that I knew you were making back here.
Oh yeah, I would say that's the very last kind of body of work I made at Penn State for the thesis show. And as you said, it really is a metaphor for the lack of substance beyond the surface. And so it was everything from I Love Lucy to Adam Sandler's Netflix film about Native people, where he plays a Native American as a protagonist, to Pharrell and other popular culture references. And so I actually saw a show in New York City, Jim Shaw at the New Museum, and his were really impressive. Of course, they were like 2 or 3 stories tall in that same medium and format. And I just really fell in love with that as the medium. I think it's like so easy to just do it yourself, but they're also so amazing as a final product. And so I think I learned I had access to a color printer my last month there, and I was just like printing out these really beautiful objects. I still have some of them here and at my parents' house. I thought they were too great to throw away.
Yeah, no, they were fantastic. I mean, you can tell they left an impression on me. It's just really a powerful work. So I have one last question in this series, and then what I typically do is shift to a set of rapid fire questions. But before I get to this penultimate question here, the powwow you mentioned, Labor Day. Will you do that this coming Labor Day?
That's the plan. I think as long as we don't have another wave or another variant, I hope I'm going to be political and say, please get vaccinated, everyone, and we'll have it this Labor Day weekend.
That sounds good. All right. Well, I'll keep my eyes open for news of the powwow being held. So here's my final question, Jeremy, in this longer format questions. So Jeremy, what do you know now that you wish you had known as let's say an 18 or 20-year-old? In other words, knowing what you know now, the wisdom that you have now, the experiences that you've lived that make you who you are now, what advice would you give to yourself as an 18 or 20-year-old Jeremy Dennis?
That's a great question. I think with Ma's house, the individual and communal connections I'm making between other people is really important to me. I love meeting new people. I love inviting them over to engage with the art on the walls or engage with our local history. And so I would say to my younger self, maybe pay more attention to those personal relationships. I do miss everyone at Penn State, but I feel like there could have been times where I just hung out with people more or learned more about their story and their art. And I feel that at just like all aspects of my life where everyone has something to teach, there's always something that you can pull from and learn from. And so I think that, we do have finite time, but we also have these really valuable connections that are all around us. And so we have to somehow find a balance between just like going in your studio all day or just trying to make those connections when you can.
That's great advice. Make those connections, take advantage of the people around you in the time that you have. Would 18-year-old Jeremy have listened to that advice?
Well, I think when I was 18, I was just like, I couldn't talk to other people. I was too shy. So I think that would be really impactful for my 18-year-old self.
Okay, very good. So what I'd like to do now, Jeremy, is move over to a set of quick questions. And by quick questions, what I mean is I'll ask you a question. You don't really have to give a long answer. They're usually questions where you can come right out and provide response. And the thing is, all of these questions have to do with Penn State and your time here at Penn State. All right. Are you ready?
Yep, all set.
Okay. Some of these we may have approached earlier, and that's okay. The same answer earlier is perfectly acceptable here. So to start us off, who was one person of influence to you during your time as a grad student at Penn State?
Oh, of course, Lonnie Graham. And I should say you because we're in conversation, but I follow your work as well. So it's close tie.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Lonnie's certainly an important and influential artist and mentor and teacher. What was or what is your favorite place on campus?
If I remember correctly, my favorite place was outside of the literary department. There was always someone preaching about religion or someone trying to engage or debate them. And
outside Willard. Yeah, the Willard
building. Yeah. I don't know if they're still there today, but I would just be able to sit there whenever I want. I knew they would always be there and people would be watching as well. So that was my favorite.
He's still there in his red hoodie. Yeah. Let's see, is there a standout moment or experience from your time at Penn State?
My standout experience thinking back, of course, all the lectures and dialogue overall, but I really love when the undergraduate student body began the hallway exhibit space and started to take care of that. I thought it was just great to I'm a big believer in like the salon style art shows and just having art everywhere and kind of being gaudy in that way. But I thought it was a great idea, and it really just like going to the restroom or going to the gallery and seeing more art was a big plus for me.
Yeah, we haven't. So that's the Hump Day Gallery in the VAB, and unfortunately, due to the pandemic, it hasn't been as populated. But let's be hopeful that they can return to that.
Mhm.
Just a few more questions here in this quick series, Jeremy. Now, imagine yourself back on campus, and imagine I took you to the creamery. What flavor of ice cream are you ordering?
Uh, I would get peanut butter, but I didn't go there enough when I was there. So another thing I miss.
So your answer to the creamery ice cream question is the right answer. And by the way, any answer to the creamery question is the right answer. So the peanut butter flavor is the right answer.
Hmm.
Where did you live during your time at Penn State?
I always lived in shared housing, so it was just a family home with a spare bedroom, and I still enjoyed that option. Really close to campus, you could walk or bike. So I don't remember the streets, however.
Okay, all right. And last question here in this quick question series, which relates to a similar question I asked just a few minutes ago. But if you could give an incoming Penn State student one piece of advice about how to set themselves up for success at Penn State, what advice would you give to that student?
um, I think at first glance, State College itself kind of seems a little bit minimum, and it's kind of like a very small town, but there's so much potential there. There's so many local residents that you can connect with, and I feel like in the last maybe half of my year there, I finally started making those connections and friendships. So I would tell people to explore. There's the campus has so many resources, but yeah, check out some of the local things that they have to offer in town.
Great. I'll let that be the last answer to our last question. Jeremy, it's been a pleasure. I'm just so pleased we could reconnect this way. I'm impressed with the work you're doing. I'm proud of the work that you're doing, and just keep it up. It's important work and meaningful work, and I wish you all the best. So thank you, Jeremy, for joining me today.
Oh, thank you. Hope we connect soon.
I hope so. Thanks.